Okay, hi everybody. Hi, how's it going? Good? Y'all fed? Ready to go? Oh, do you have a clicker? Is this the clicker?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to talk all about happiness for the next half hour. And I just defended my PhD here in November of last year. So I research happiness here on campus. And I put out, when I was recruiting, I sent one mass email to all the undergraduate students at Western. And I needed 60 students to be in my study in order to get a big enough sample size. And for those of you who've done research, recruitment is often the hardest part. And from one email, and 1,282 students responded to me in my study. Yeah. And there was no like $5. Like if you give undergraduate students $5, that was one of them. You get in studies all the time. I asked, do you want to learn to be happy? And that was the response. So 1 in 30, essentially, undergraduate students said, yes, I want to get a study and learn to be happy, just from one email. Isn't that crazy? So I think it's because we want to learn how to be happy, and so that's what my research focuses on. My PhD is in health science, and I specialize in health promotion. So what I'm most passionate about is figuring out how do we live the best life ever. And in terms of happiness, that can be a very key part of the equation. So not only do I do research, I also do a lot of media and speaking around happiness. Oh, here, spoiler, I'm going to get into some more research later, but this is the finding. So I had a 4-week study that was done at Western, and every week the students would watch YouTube videos that taught skills that are highly correlated with happiness. And at the end of the talk, I'm going to teach you guys some skills so that when you leave here today, you can be happier than when you came in. So is that good? So I did some of that in my study, and we saw that there was a significant increase in the students' happiness when they started my study and when they ended. What was interesting was that because my sample size was so big, I had to go back to ethics and get a revision to my study so I could recruit more people. And for those of you that have ever dealt with the ethics board, you know what a fun time that is. And so because they were so delayed, my study ended when exams were starting. So students were already extra stressed, and even still they were happier. So we're going to touch on some of the things they learned in a bit. I also am the happiness expert on the social and on breakfast television. So I do a bunch of different media, sharing research in a way that is accessible and that we can actually learn, because I think especially being at the university, we get into the research and the science, but if we don't translate that into everyday life, then I think we're kind of missing the mark. And that's why even events like this are so amazing, because we have the opportunity to share and to learn a bunch of different research. So when we think about happiness, it's often seen as this sort of sign of good psychological health, right? The goal all the time. We want to be happy, and often if we pay attention to what motivates our behaviors on a conscious or subconscious level, it really is this desire to be happy. And yet, we're never actually taught how to be happy, right? We go to school, we learn math, we learn science, we learn geography and history, but nobody actually ever tells us how to be happy. We just are told to be happy. And then when we're not happy, we wonder why. But it's because we've never been taught. And so, you know in Google, when you type in and it tries to like auto-populate what it is that you're gonna say, it tries to guess based on popular answers? When you look to Google and you type in how to be, this is a screenshot I took on my computer. It says, the first thing that comes up is how to be happy. And that is about how to be rich, how to be a real estate agent, and how to be pretty. So, beyond learning real estate and all that, people really want to know. We want to learn, how is it that we can be happy? And interestingly though, when you look at the research, the first ever published scientific paper on happiness was in 1980. 1980 was the first time any scientist ever thought, let's do a study to figure out how to be happy. Before that, we looked at depression and all sorts of negative things, but never up until that point did we even think to ask the question, well, how is it that we are happy? What's exciting is that you can see that more and more and more people are starting to research happiness. And before we get into that, happiness is kind of one of those things where I didn't have to get up here today and explain to you what happiness is. Every single one of us in this room, we all have a general understanding of what it is to be happy. Yes? Right? But how do you actually define it? What is happiness actually? And when you start to think about it, and then you start to add in marketing and what's going on in the media and in advertising, it gets really confusing. And then you add in things like Facebook to the equation. This guy's saying, I can't talk right now, I'm simulating happiness on Facebook. Right? So we can actually go on a button and tell Facebook I'm feeling happy. But what does that actually mean? And then you look at things like this Coke ad here, and it says if you open a Coke, you open happiness. And if you're not a Coke person but you're a Pepsi person, that's okay because they weigh in on it too. They say that happiness is a choice. Hashtag just so you know. This is a picture I took in New York of a billboard, or a bus stop actually. And it says, happiness is crispy tacos arriving just as you walk through the door. Any arguments there? No. This is a Via Rail station here in London, Ontario. I pulled up, I live in Toronto now, and I used to commute a lot back and forth from London to Toronto. And I saw this and I pulled up one day, it says, happiness is delicious food and a huge screen. So, all of this is just a small sample of all the marketing that's going on, and no wonder it's confusing. No wonder we don't understand what happiness is, because we're told it's a bunch of different things. And so that makes it extra complicated when you're a researcher, because when you're a researcher and you have to study something, you have to tell people what it is that you're studying. So in terms of happiness, this is the definition I use. It comes from Dr. Sonia Lumire's, she's out in California. And she defines happiness as the experience of joy, contentment, and positive well-being, combined with a sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. What do you guys think? That kind of encapsulate? It's tricky because it's like love. How do you define love? How do you take an emotion or a feeling and capture it in words? It's really difficult because we're limited by our vocabulary. And even more than that, I think getting beyond this idea of defining happiness, is it contentment, is it joy, any of those things, what I think really the big picture, the important thing, is this idea that happiness isn't a destination. Oftentimes we think, like, I will be happy when, fill in the blank, right? I will be happy when I graduate from school, when I get that car, when I get that job, when I get that partner, whatever it is. And so when we start to reframe and rethink about happiness, this is probably one of the most significant things I started learning when I dug into the happiness research, is that happiness is a practice. It's something that we do every single day. It's a means to a life well lived. It's not a destination at the end of our life. Does that make sense? So when we can kind of reframe happiness like that and see that it's actually a practice, it's something that we have to work at all of the time, it completely changes the equation. And for some reason, that's the way that happiness has been perpetuated, but it doesn't really make sense. Like, here's a picture of The Rock. So The Rock, when he travels, when he's on movie sets, he takes his 40,000-pound gym to wherever he's going and he sets it up and he works out all the time at his movie set, because The Rock knows that in order to be fit and in order to have muscles like that, he has to work out all the time, every day. It's a practice. So he would never go into the gym, do an amazing workout, post on Instagram, and then say, I'm done, I'm fit, I've reached fitness, right? He would never say that. Or you would never go make a green smoothie and put in all the superfoods, drink it, and then be like, okay, I've reached nutritional wellness, like I never need to eat again. I'm done, I'm good, I got it. Right? We would never say that. It's not something that we would do, but yet for some reason, when we think about happiness, we tend to think of it, we're gonna get to it someday. And so reframing happiness in that perspective really changes the equation. And when we can look at happiness through that lens, we can start to think about how it is in our life. And oftentimes I get asked, okay, well, why does happiness matter? Like if I was to ask you right now, make a list of the top sort of 3 items, let's say, in your life that are your priorities. What do you need to focus on in order to live a healthier life? Oftentimes we'll think about things like nutrition, fitness, sleep, managing stress, things like that. So why does happiness matter, and why is that even in the equation to begin with? Well, it turns out that happiness really has a significant impact on longevity and on our health. So show of hands, who in here thinks that smoking is bad for you? Everybody, right? We all understand that smoking is bad for us. And we know that smoking isn't just like a little bit bad for us, it's pretty bad for us, right? So as bad as happiness, or as bad as smoking is for us, happiness is that much better for our health. So the impact that happiness has is comparable to smoking or not in terms of longevity. It's pretty crazy, right? And not only that, happy people are healthier. So happy people have lower rates of cardiovascular disease as compared to unhappy people. They have stronger immune systems, they heal faster from injury, they live longer, they get better sleep, and they tend to make better nutritional choices. So in terms of looking at one thing in your life that has sort of a far-reaching impact on happiness, or on our health, it's happiness. And not only that, the other thing sometimes when I tell people and we talk about happiness, they'll say, you know what, Gillian, I'm just not really, I'm not a very selfish person. I'd rather focus on other people, help other people. So even though happiness is important, I want to do other things and help other people. And turns out that focusing on your happiness is one of the most selfless things that you can do. Because when you focus on your happiness, happy people compared to unhappy people, they're more cooperative, they're better problem solvers, they're better team players, they're rated as more liked by their peers, they're more likely to volunteer both their time and their money, and they are more creative. So not only does focusing on your happiness allow you to show up and focus on living a healthier life, it actually helps you with how you show up and interact with people around you. So I think that that's pretty cool. Now, a lot of times when I start talking about happiness with people, they'll say, you know what, Gillian, I'm just not a very happy person. Some people are more glasses half full, they're more positive, they're more happy, but I'm not. And so that kind of brings up the question of well, how much of our happiness is genetic compared to how much of it is a learned behavior? And that can be a really hard thing to tease out, because how do you determine if it's environmental or genetic, right? If you have happy parents, are you happier because your parents were happy and that's what you learned? Or were your genetics predisposing you to be happier? So when we think about that, it's really hard to tease out. So what researchers did, this is a really big study in the happiness research, they found twins that were genetically identical and they were separated at birth. Because when you take twins that have the same genetics and they separate them at birth, you can start to tease out a little bit more about genetics versus environmental. And so what they found was about 50% of our happiness is genetically determined. Who's surprised by that? A lot of people? Yeah. I was like, okay, so about 50% is genetically determined. So you can thank your parents or not, but that's kind of what we're playing with there. Now, this yellow sliver here, that's life circumstances. So that's our job, that's where we live every day, that's our friends, that's kind of our day-to-day life. And that only affects about 10% of our total capacity for happiness. Was anyone surprised by that? Yeah, I was. Because I live in downtown Toronto now and I sit in traffic all the time and I find it hard to believe that my environment only is affected by 10% of my happiness, but it really is. And so with that, this is the reason. Has anyone here ever lived next to a train track? Do you hear the train after a while go by?
Yeah.
You did? All the time, okay. You're the exception to that. Anyone else? Do you hear the train?
I hear the train all the time, I like peace and quiet.
You like peace and quiet, yeah. So what happens is when we have certain behaviors that happen all the time, they don't impact us as much as we think. It's a concept called hedonic adaptation, if you look in terms of psychology. And basically what happens is, even though something bothers us all the time, our body, we're adaptive creatures. And so over time, it doesn't impact us as much as we may think it does. Now the cool part of this pie chart, in my opinion, is the purple part, because that's the part that is within our control. So we can't control our genetics, and it's difficult to control our environment, and yet we still have this 40%, this piece of the puzzle that's completely up to us. That's the personal responsibility piece of our happiness. So that's the piece that we can learn and we can practice. And so as someone that researches happiness, that's the piece that I focus on. Because we can learn skills and behaviors, and I'm going to teach you some shortly, that can impact your happiness. So I think that's kind of an empowering and exciting idea, because it tells us that no matter what we were born with, no matter where we live, no matter where we work, any of those things, we still have control over a fairly large piece of our happiness. So I'm going to teach you a couple different skills that we talked about in my research studies that have been shown to increase happiness. They're highly correlated. But before that, I often get asked, okay, well, what about depression? Or something like that. How does that fit into the equation? And so, if your body can't produce, say, dopamine or serotonin, or it doesn't have those basic building blocks in order to create or to function in our body, that's where medical intervention comes in. And there's a time and a place absolutely for that. And if it's not that, and that's the case, that's what we're going to kind of focus on now. Some different tips to boost happiness. Sound good? Okay. So this is one of the things, I always thought the goal in life was to be happy and to not be sad. I always thought, okay, I want to study happiness because I want to learn how can I be happy all the time. And I thought that was the goal. And then I was surprised to learn that that isn't actually the case. So happiness and sadness aren't two ends of the same continuum. So it's not like you're happy or you're sad. They're actually separate constructs. So what that means is that you can be more happy and less happy, or more sad and less sad. And you can experience them both at the same time. That's what is called a bittersweet emotion. So for example, if you have someone that, say, just passed away after a long battle with a terminal disease, you're really sad that they passed away, but then you're also kind of happy or relieved because they're not in pain anymore. So it's not a question of get rid of sadness and feel happy all the time. What it is it's recognizing that as humans, we have all these different emotions. We have happiness, we have sadness, we have anger, we have frustration, we have joy, we have elation, contentment, all of these different emotions. And collectively, that's what makes the human experience. And so if we want to look at sort of having a really healthy life, it's not a question of getting rid of those bad or negative emotions, things like depression, stress, anxiety. It becomes a question of this. How do we learn to make our lows higher and our highs higher? Because as you go over time, what happens is it starts to build. And then the question becomes, how do I not marinate in those emotions all the time? So really, in terms of healthy psychological functioning, it's whenever you feel whatever emotion it is that you're feeling, you feel it fully, and then you choose again, or you sit with it for a little bit, and then you use some of the practices that I'm going to talk about to help switch your mood or to switch your emotions. Does that make sense? So I don't know, a bunch of you probably know this, right? Before cell phones and social networks, this is how we figured out where our friends were. Remember that? I did a talk for Western leadership class, and I put this up, and it was like all 17-year-olds. It was like blank stares because they didn't know what I was showing. But this is what it used to be. This is how you figured out where your friends were, was you looked for the bites. And so there was an 80-year longitudinal study from Harvard, and they looked at a bunch of different factors, and then they found the #1 predictor for both long-term health and happiness was social connection. And what I mean by that is having at least 1 or 2 people in your life that you can have a conversation beyond, hey, how are you? I'm good. How are you? I'm fine. To have those conversations where if you're really upset or you're going through something, you can go and confide in them, and vice versa. So it has to have that reciprocity in the relationship. But when you do that, that is the most impactful thing in terms of happiness. And I think that even, especially nowadays, when we're going so much more online and things become electronic, having that face-to-face time with people is so important, and having those connections. And that's not to say that you can't have meaningful connections and talk over text or email, but really focusing on having those personal relationships and building that and making an effort. Because I think especially now more than ever, it can be really easy. You've got your really long to-do list and all these things to do. And so how do you take time out to focus on your relationships and prioritizing that? Because when you do that, it not only makes you feel happier, but also impacts your health. And so this is actually really interesting. Research found that loneliness, so not having social connection, is as powerful in terms of impacting our health as smoking or alcoholism. So we touched on the smoking before, and people all agree that drinking a lot in excess, not good for our health. Loneliness is just as bad. And actually in the UK, just last year, at the end of last year, they started having doctors who can actually write prescriptions for people that are feeling really lonely to go and to do social activities, because we're starting to recognize that having that social human connection is so important. Now, for those of you that I have 2 nieces that love Frozen. The song's gonna be in my head the rest of the day. But I think sometimes when we start to think about happiness and I start teaching you like different things that you can do in order to be happy, it can get really overwhelming, right? It's like, okay, I already have this like massive to-do list, and now you want me to add all these other things to it. It can get really overwhelming. The good news is with happiness, sometimes actually removing things from our life can make us happier. Like there's these people, I call them energy vampires. You know those people when you leave after you've seen them and you just feel like drained, tired? Yeah, so when we start to think about what are the people, the things that we do day to day that we can actually remove, sometimes subtracting or deleting can have a positive impact on our happiness. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing, and what you can do in order to figure out what are those things that I need to remove. And someone usually always asks me, well, like, there's someone in their family that's doing that, right? So sometimes it's not a matter of completely deleting, but it's minimizing the time or reducing it to even still see changes in happiness. So what you can do is throughout the day as you go, check in with yourself. and start to notice, like, okay, I just did this, I watched the show, I talked to this person, I went to the gym, how do I feel? Do I feel more happy or less happy than when I started? And when you do that and you start to sort of notice throughout the day and bring some awareness to that, what that does is it really allows you to see where are the areas in my life where I'm doing things where when I'm done I feel happier, and where are those areas in my life where I'm doing things and when I'm done I don't feel as happy. And so that's a really important piece of the equation. And the other thing is with happiness, so I finished my PhD and I'm publishing it as a book right now. So I'm going through that process, and I was really struggling with this idea of, like, how do I write a book about happiness? Like, you can go to Chapters right now, they have like a whole section, a happiness section. And I thought, well, how do I even write a book about happiness? Because the book that I would write for myself about happiness and the book that Dr. Lemon would write, that I would write for him about happiness would be different. It would be different for every single one of you in this room. Because happiness is different for every single one of us in this room. And not only that, happiness is different in different times in our life for every single person in this room. So I can't tell you how to be happy because you need to figure it out for yourself. I can share research and data and tell you that there's certain practices that may be more likely to increase your happiness. But really at the end of the day, it comes to you and to figuring out what are those things in your life. And so by checking in and starting to bring some awareness to your daily life and noticing where are those things that make me more and less happy, what that can do is it can help you to figure out for yourself and get to know for yourself what are those things that are going to make me happy. Make sense? So this is one of my favorite ones. And so when I finished my research study, at the end of it, I did some qualitative data. I collected some qualitative data. So I asked a lot of the students, what are the things that you learned during this study that were most impactful? What was your favorite thing that you learned? And by far, the thing that came up the most was gratitude. I'm just curious, how many of you in here, show of hands, practice gratitude on a regular basis? That's awesome. And do you know what's so cool? As I've been kind of going and researching happiness and giving talks more and more and more, I'm seeing more hands go up. Because I think it's pretty trendy right now too, but it really is an important part of our happiness. And gratitude is one of those things, like it's not an overnight, you wake up and you're happy. And that's because, like I said, happiness is not a destination, it's a practice. So gratitude is one of those things that slowly over time it builds. And then when you kind of look back after a period of time, you start to notice changes. And when I say practice gratitude, what I mean is taking time every single day to think about, or better yet, write down things that you're grateful for. 3 things, let's say. So in my study, we did an activity called 3 Great Things, where the students had to write down 3 great things that happened to them every single day. And so this is a picture of the iPhone. So the far one here, that's the first generation iPhone, and then it goes all the way over to the iPhone 6. Do you guys remember when the first iPhone, or your first smartphone that you had, your camera phone came out, and you like take pictures of everything, and you thought it was like the most amazing thing in the world? Look back now at how blurry the pictures were. But at the time, we didn't really notice that, and then as each generation of the iPhone came out, we started to see things get sharper and sharper and sharper. And gratitude is kind of the same thing, where over time, it starts to build, and it starts to impact, and it starts to get better and better and better. And I can actually show you another interesting study. So show of hands, who in here thinks that they would be happier if they won the lottery? Seriously? A lot of you guys would be happy if you got a big chunk of money. So in this study, what you can see here is that the green bar, that was researchers that were studying lottery winners. So they studied the first data point there is at time 0, so this is right when they won the lottery. And not surprisingly, when they won the lottery, you see a huge increase in their happiness. They're pretty happy, which is not surprising. But then what's interesting, if you follow the green bar over the 6-month period, 7-month period, then what happens is over time, your happiness starts to go back down. And it's because if you think about it, if you won the lottery, like that day, you'd be so excited. But then, say a couple weeks or a month later, do you wake up every morning and be like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited I won the lottery last month, right? We adapt, we get used to things. And so when we start to adapt, you see that the happiness goes down. Now the cool part, in my opinion, of the study is the blue bar, because the blue bar is people that started to practice gratitude. So at the beginning, at time 1 there, at the bottom, they weren't that happy. And you start to see the blue bar over the period of the study increase. So these are people that were practicing gratitude, which are separate from the lottery winners. At the 3-month mark, there's an intersection there. So at that point, the people that won the lottery and the people that practice gratitude had the same level of happiness. And then if you follow it all the way over to the end, what you see is that at the end of the study, the people that practice gratitude were statistically significantly happier than the people that won the lottery. And I think that's really cool because there's so many things in this world that we can control, and there's a lot of things that we can't control. And we can control if we're going to take a few minutes every single day to think about things that we're grateful for. And you might be wondering, okay, well, does it matter what I ask? In terms of happiness, this is Waldo. He's sitting in a bar, and he says, nobody ever asks, how's Waldo? Right? So the questions that we ask, do they matter in terms of gratitude? And it turns out they don't. So you can, I just wrote a couple examples of different questions that you can ask in terms of gratitude. You know, what amazing things have happened to you today? You can write about this. 3 body parts you're grateful for, what skills or abilities you have. It really doesn't matter what it is that you focus on in terms of being grateful. What matters is that you pay attention and you think about it in as much detail and as are descriptive as possible. And so there are different tools. You can actually just take a blank piece of paper every day and just write out 3 things that you're grateful for. That's what we did in my study. There's also a ton of different apps. There's things like the 5-minute journal where you can get pre-filled pages that are the same every day, and they prompt you and they ask you what you're grateful for. So it doesn't really matter. So you can take that pressure off and just try to notice and practice and write down, ideally, 3 things that you're grateful for every single day, and know that over time it builds. So, do you guys listen to podcasts? I know you guys like podcasts. I was listening to Derek Sivers, he was on Tim Ferriss's podcast a while ago, and he said, if more information was the answer, we'd all be billionaires with perfect abs. And so, I think it's really true, right? Because knowing and coming even to something like this here today, it's amazing, and you learn so much, and yet, if knowledge was enough, then we would all be billionaires with perfect abs, but it's not. So oftentimes when people say to me, okay, Gillian, well, like, you research happiness, like, what's the magic pill? What's like the one thing that I need to know or do in order to be happy? And so I share with you some things that you can do today, letting go of things, focusing on your social connection, practicing gratitude, and those will all help increase your happiness, but it's up to you. You're the pharmacist. At the end of the day, there is no magic pill for happiness. There's not one thing that you're ever going to do to arrive at happiness. Because like I said, happiness is a practice. It's something that we do over and over and over again. And so knowing that, it's up to you. Checking in, noticing what makes you more happy and less happy. And then from there, starting to notice that over time, it's going to build. So with that, I'll end up. That's my email if you guys have any questions or anything like that. And I think we have a Q&A at the end. Right, Dr. Lemon? Okay, so thank you guys.